Okay, everybody, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So how are people doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. Things are going pretty well. They just announced they're going to put everyone here in France into confinement, which is a bit of a bummer, but they're going to keep the schools open. So that's a good thing. So that means we can still do what we need to do, and the kids will still have a chance to see other kids and that kind of thing. So that's good. So today we are going to officially end and start anew from the Pacific War, the Second World War, depending upon when you start talking about the war. And so I asked you to read a very brief, like a page and a half in John Dower's book. Could you just give me a sense, like by raising your hands, either like with the button or with your actual hands, if you're able to do that, just so I know. It's on Moodle. See a few. Okay. All right. So I won't ask too much about that, but I do want to see if get a sense. So when here, I'm going to do a PowerPoint share and we can talk about this as we're doing that. So I'm going to do a screen share and we'll do that. And then I will ask you a couple of questions. So the atomic bombings of Japan on August 9th and and on August, let's see, the bombings, there were two bombings, and the first one is, I believe, on the 6th, and the second is on the 9th, but I'm getting my dates mixed up. It's been a very long day. So 6 and yeah. So it takes, so between the 6th and the 9th, when the atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, there is a delay, right? And then suddenly the government announces it's going to surrender to the Western countries, to the Allies. But people in Japan are not aware of all this until the emperor makes the announcement. And so that's what I want to focus on first, is sort of how the emperor ends the war for the Japanese. And this was the topic of this very brief reading that I put up on Moodle. So on August 14th, the emperor comes on to the radio, and he comes on the radio and he begins to speak. If you had a chance to look at the Dower reading, did any of you get a sense of what the emperor sounded like? What was his voice like? What was his kind of energy like on the radio?
One thing I got from that was that he spoke like very like formal language, and it wasn't like what like the everyday Japanese person would have spoke. So it kind of was difficult for them to understand.
Okay, Yuri. So one important fact is that he was using a very formal Japanese, which as emperor I think is perhaps understandable. But in this case, on his first ever radio voice encounter, it was quite surprising, right, and hard to understand. Anything else about his voice come to mind?
Yes, is that a lot of the people were very surprised by how high pitched and a bit like stilted it sounded, because to them, like, they had never heard him speak directly. So in their minds, he was very much built up as this like mythical, untouchable figure. And so like to have the voice sound so human was probably a bit shocking.
Yeah, very much so, right? So the voice that they hear is it's a high-pitched voice. And in the archaic formal Japanese language, but the high pitch I think was quite a shock. Japanese masculinity was all tied up in this imperial project, of which the emperor was the center, right? And so to have him have a voice that was soft-spoken and high-pitched did not match with sort of the image that they had of him when he hadn't spoken. So I wanted to sort of go over that with you a little bit. As you may have seen, right, in reading this, people didn't know what to make of this speech. They were kind of shocked, but then they eventually realized that he was announcing that Japan had indeed lost the war. So let's keep moving on. Hirohito is the one who orders the cabinet to surrender with this message, which he announces to the people of Japan. And then he gives, and his announcement is called the Jeweled Voice broadcast, because the emperor's voice is called the Jeweled Voice. It is an unheard, special, treasured voice, and here it was being heard. I want to take a few seconds to go over a little bit of what he said, to give you a sense of what people would have heard in Japanese during his broadcast on August 14th. So let's read this together briefly. Okay, so this is another text we had a chance to look at here. What are some of the sort of main messages that you get from this broadcast transcript? Carl, yeah.
It's kind of mentioned in the dower reading, but it ignores a lot of like the atrocities that Japan had committed over the course of the Pacific War and World War II. That was kind of interesting.
I mean, how can you say it ignores it, Carl? I'm looking at the text. It says,
Geez.
yeah, it says we did not. It was far from our thought to infringe upon the sovereignty of other nations or to embark upon territorial aggrandizement. So it must be they just kind of it's in there,
I must
right?
have been wrong.
No,
Yeah, it is.
You're right. It's definitely not in there.
No. I must have.
It's definitely not in there,
Part.
Carl.
I'm sorry. I do see it now. That is my mistake.
No, I'm saying like that you're right.
Oh, I'm right.
I'm saying that you're right, Carl. I'm saying that.
I'm tired today. I'm sorry.
I'm making it hard for you. Oh, believe me, I understand. So this realization that they are just sort of glossing over all the atrocities, it really stands out, right? That these are things that are not at all mentioned or even alluded to in this announcement. So that's a great point, Carl. I saw your hand up, Wells, as well.
Yeah, it also just like, I think the Gordon text calls it like one of the greatest understatements in history or something like that, in modern history. But he just is very passively like, oh, the war doesn't seem to be going in Japan's favor, so I think we might tap out, instead of being like, 3 cities are rubble and like millions of people died, so we got to tap out. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, he definitely sort of minimizes the language that he used to describe how bad things are for Japan, right? They've been sending up, young teenage pilots to crash their bodies and planes into American military uh, vehicles, because they're out of choices, and people are starving in Japan, and people are, getting ready to fight the enemy off with spears. Things are very bad in Japan, and this way that he describes things is definitely sort of super euphemistic, and that I think is well put. I saw also Jack McDonough had his hand up, so I'll let you give us your thoughts as well.
Hey, this is more of like a question, but do you
Sure.
think this speech has like sort of ties into how Japan looks at the war today? Because Germany, like in comparison to Japan, has done like a lot more like apologizing and sort of like acknowledgement of what they've done. And I think like right here, whereas they kind of start by just hand waving it and not acknowledging it, I think that might sort of play into the way they view it today.
I mean, this speech was definitely one that imperial advisors wrote for, or the emperor, or at least helped him write significantly. And this is a sort of a technology of understatement and euphemism, and a sort of omission that we see continuing on in the post-war period. So yeah, indeed, this is it does persist. We do see, as we'll see in our class over the next several classes, that changes do happen. There is movement towards more, I won't say like admitting wrongdoing, but recognizing that people got hurt, sort of those kinds of things. But the sort of conservative, rightist Japanese sort of pro-imperial perspective persists, and is still, today very powerful. The new prime minister of Japan, Suga, what's his first name? Anyway, Prime Minister Suga is of the same mind, and he has vowed in many ways to try and keep this stream alive. So we'll talk about that, how this all plays out, and that's a very good point that you make there, Jack. It does indeed carry on. So we've had a chance to look at this a little bit. This this commits Japan, to having to endure the unendurable, suffering the insufferable, and so this at least makes it clear that the Japanese are going to have to carry the weight of this loss, which, as you can imagine, they already felt very bad. They were exhausted, right? There's a big word in Japanese, kyodatsu, or like psychic exhaustion or a psychic break that's happening because the Japanese are have been fighting this losing war for so long with so much misinformation. And so what we really see is that this is a breaking point for the Japanese people. So in the aftermath of the surrender, excuse me, the government turns its attention to how to minimize its culpability, its sort of criminality, when as they are surely going to be judged by foreign courts. We see, across major cities in Tokyo, in Japan, the burning of government documents, the fires, light up the sky even at night. Part of why we have a harder time finding out about Japanese atrocities than we did about the Germans, but then we were still able to get these things, through other kinds of sources. We also see that the blue sky markets are going to be the only way to get things in the aftermath of the war. Any kind of normal commerce has entirely become impossible, and we see prices go out the roof. And we see that people who have been historically in Japan mistreated, people like the Koreans and Taiwanese, and members of the Yakuza as well, they're able to take advantage of the situation and to use these back channel ways to get food and then to make money and other things as well. We see food rationing continues, in the post-war period as well, but we still have people who have been suffering from starvation who are going to keep starving in Japan as well. And on top of that, we have so many men who have been able to come back and take care of the agricultural responsibilities, be they fighting men or men who had to go work in factories for the war effort. So these things all lead to a poor harvest in 45, which exacerbates the problem considerably. And here I mentioned again kyodatsu, or the exhaustion that has come up. So the Allied Council for Japan is a group that is set out to decide Japan's fate once the war is over. The U.S., Great Britain, and the USSR together are the Western countries, and then to them is added China, which in this case is they're sort of a much weaker ally, but they are still part of this team, and they meet to decide how Japan is going to move forward. And initially, this is supposed to be a sort of a joint effort, a joint project. But the real person behind at the helm of the occupation is this man that we see here, General Douglas MacArthur. And I think his picture says a lot about his personality and about his approach. He was important and victorious in fighting the Japanese, and so he was well positioned to then step into this role. But he also had a very strong vision for what Japan should be like in the future and sort of what it could be like, its potential to be a modern country that would not wage war against the world, and would also embrace as opposed to opposing the West. So underneath MacArthur's leadership, the powers of the Allies invade on August 30th, officially invade. They've been moving up from Okinawa and other parts of Japan. They've done their attacks on Tokyo and on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they finally invade the troops with boots on the ground on August 30th in mainland Japan. And right away, this is going to be a military dictatorship with one individual in charge giving all the orders, MacArthur. And he has a very clear goal, and it is to take away Japan's ability to wage war, to demilitarize Japan. As we'll discuss later on today or maybe next class, this goal is not the same as the goal that Japan eventually has of becoming a pacifist nation. That is actually something that the Japanese themselves, many socialists who get out of prison and become the first generation of post-war leaders, that they actually put in the Constitution. But that's a talk for later. His second goal is to keep in place, as much as possible, the existing government structures to establish democracy. The U.S. actually is, today speaking of democracies, is not actually a true democracy. And so this is it's always funny for me to see sort of the U.S. trying to preach democracy when there are other countries that have a more transparent and direct democracy. But anyway, to establish democracy in Japan, and to do so without destroying the government as a whole. These are both, I think, very difficult tasks, but I think given the military of Japan, of the U.S., the U.S. military's ability to invade Japan, the bigger task was how to not destroy the government but establish democracy. And on the side, MacArthur is interested in having the United States be sort of the guiding light for Japan and keeping their role as the prevalent role and minimizing the role of other allied countries that are trying, hopefully, to also have an imprint on Japan's future. And in this, he's very successful. So France, Great Britain, Netherlands, and are going to become part of this, the Allied Council for Japan, which is actually going to be a bigger organization than the one I mentioned before. And they will hopefully oversee this transition. And then looking for even more influence, we have a 10-nation Far East Commission that's established a little bit later on in the fall to try again oversee this Japan's occupation. And so finally, they come into being in January 30th with the U.S. and Great Britain, China, Australia, France, Canada, the Netherlands, New Zealand, India, and then I'm missing. I'm not sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so there's 10 countries here, and both PI and Secretary General are both from Great Britain and the U.S. So this commission is supposed to again oversee the occupation as an international, not single country-led endeavor, but the real power will still remain with MacArthur, partially because the other countries are very busy with other problems. India is very busy, for example, with the surge in post-war nationalism. Great Britain is trying to rebuild. You know, all these countries are very busy. So in the end, the U.S. is the country best positioned to oversee this transition. This is a picture here we have of Emperor Hirohito and General MacArthur. So this picture is taken at the general headquarters of the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, SCAP, in Tokyo. As you can see, it was not taken at the Emperor's Palace. Let me ask you, just take a second and look at this image and tell me what you think about it. What sort of, you know, what does this image say to you? What does it kind of, I don't know, what kinds of insights might you gain from this image?
They look very awkward.
Look very awkward.
Yeah, I was
Okay,
gonna
I can
say
go
it
with
doesn't
that.
seem the most amicable. It's very formal.
Very formal.
I
And
would-
are they equally formal, the two people in this image?
I was gonna say that it's not equally formal. The prime. I forget who it is on the right, but they're wearing their their suit
The Emperor.
tie. Is it actually the Emperor? Okay, yeah. So the Emperor is on the right, is all formally dressed and everything.
Yeah, this is the
And
Emperor.
then MacArthur, I believe, is on the left, is just, he's just not even wearing his his formal military attire. He's just like in his he's just wearing just standard pants and a shirt. So
That's really insightful, right? So I mean, look at this, right? The Emperor is dressed in his best, right? His best Western wear, a very expensive and well put together suit, and also standing very formally, like sort of hands to his side in a very formal gesture. MacArthur, he doesn't have anything that shows that he's a general. He doesn't have his bars, doesn't have his hat, he doesn't have a uniform that would show his station. He's also standing in a way that's much less formal. His hands are sort of on his hips. His feet are not. Sometimes they're actually staggered a little bit. So I think that that was a really astute observation that you made there, Sam. So indeed, this I think picture can be used to represent the relationship that the U.S. and Japan are going to have during the occupation. One in which the U.S. Is going to go about things in a very American way, in a very oftentimes informal or not formalized way, and exercise its authority over the Japanese. The Japanese, the emperor has never had to meet anybody at their house, right? The emperor stays in his palace, and you go to the emperor. But here we have MacArthur, who is forcing the emperor to make the trip over to the headquarters of the GHQ of the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers. So let's talk about what this occupation looks like on the ground a little bit. Can you see what's happening in this picture?
Is he giving the kids money?
Not
I think
money,
he's-
but definitely something that makes them happy.
Andy.
I think he's giving
Yeah.
chocolate.
Candy.
Oh,
Chocolate. Yeah, exactly. So he's giving out chocolate. So we see these are, this is a very frequent scene. One of the things that we see a lot in the recollections of the American occupation are these moments where children or sometimes young adults are given chocolate by the American occupying force. Why does that matter? Why is that important to our story?
It's very much propaganda. It's very much American propaganda, I would assume.
Okay, so on the one hand, it's definitely propaganda, right? Propaganda for what?
Probably, like Angela says in the chat, at least part to go make people forget the fact that they set 2 nuclear bombs down on Japan for no real reason. By
So
promoting this
so
better
trying
image.
to sort of changing the image of the Americans coming to Japan from that of deadly invading force to that of friendly paternalistic candy giving troops. So that I think is accurate. It's definitely propaganda, but it also serves a purpose that is, I think, a bit more, a bit less. That's a bit more sort of pragmatic, right? And that is that when the Japanese are looking ahead at the Americans who are going to arrive, they know this from the emperor's broadcast. They are terrified, right? Because propaganda against the Americans in Japan has been tremendous about Americans being very tall. They were going to come, they were going to rape all the women in Japan, that they were going to show no mercy. This is part of the mentality that led so many people to commit suicide, right? Before the surrender, even during the surrender to the occupation forces. So this kind of interaction between these scary American soldiers and excuse me, Japanese children, it serves to kind of show that it's not gonna be like that. The Japanese don't need to be afraid of the Americans because this is how they're going to play out. And of course, behind that, there is a big sort of very visible, but invisible, kind of strength that assures the U.S. forces they hold all the cards, but the interactions will be peaceful for the most part. Or so this kind of scene, this kind of interaction kind of augurs. So the occupation really occupies Japan. So we have here the various bases that the occupation places in Japan to oversee the country and to occupy it. And so the military is going to sort of, the US forces are going to be in Japan to sort of oversee its transition from being a country that was on the wrong side of things and that was fighting against the whole world almost, it seems like, and who for them was following ideals of fascism and totalitarianism, and as they move towards something that is more akin to democracy. But there are lots of these bases, and actually this map shows the bases that are still in Japan today. So keep that in mind. There are even more before. So let's talk a bit about the occupation as a project. So the military is there, and they are the ones doing everything. Even they are the ones overseeing the remaking of civil life in Japan. And so the occupation, the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, working underneath MacArthur, is divided up into sections. And most of the sections are actually not about military things at all. They're about, people, about social, economic, political, environmental things. So here we can see all the different sections. I'm going to, so for tomorrow, for discussion sections, I want to beg you to go to Moodle and click on the link that I've put up for the 40-minute it's more like a biographical lecture by Beata Sirota Gordon, who is one of the writers of the new Constitution for Japan, who belonged to the government section, which I've put here in bold. And it's really great. I think that you'll find the way that she talks about her role in writing the Constitution is engaging and very funny. And she's a quirky old lady. I mean, she passed away recently, and so but we have this recording of her, which I think is really great. So if you can watch that. And the quiz that I've asked you to do for tomorrow is based upon this 40-minute discussion that she gives during this lecture about her life. And the part I'm asking you to watch is the part where she talks about the Constitution of Japan, Japan's post-war Constitution. So anyway, she is working with within this structure, and they're all trying to work on different parts of Japan, Japanese government and Japanese, companies and transportation and communication, all these different areas to make Japan able to reestablish itself as a powerful country, as an ally to the United States. And also as a country that is going to fit within the sort of a new post-war international order. And it's very thorough, although it's also very quick, these kinds of activities and actions. So the new Constitution for Japan is actually drafted in 1946. So it's quite quick, right? And what I've just highlighted here is that the new rights are going to be included, like true rights to freedom of religion. Before it was sort of conditional. A right to assembly, right to freedom of speech, right, the right to work, the right to organize, right to bargain collectively. These are all things that are going to be enshrined in the new Constitution that that the occupation forces, who are American forces, that they actually write for people of Japan. I also highlight that women are going to be given on paper equality in marriage, in divorce, and in property. These are also new things that are going to be added, and they are associated with the aforementioned Beata Sirota Gordon, who I hope that you'll have a chance to read, to listen to, and then to do the quiz about, and discuss more in this important and controversial for many people articles of this Constitution is Article 9. So Article 9 is a part of the Constitution that actually, it's very interesting. The Japanese prime minister and other socialists were asked to do a constitution, and they did one that was not good enough. And so Article 9 is actually one of the things that the Japanese came up with, and that was kept for, and a bit improved upon, but kept for the SCAP Constitution for the new Japan. So Article 9, the people of Japan forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, or a threat of use of force as a means of settling international disputes. So Japan's right to war, or to use the threat of war, is removed. This makes Japan one of only a handful of pacifist nations in the world who are committed by constitutions to not engaging in war. And as sort of a corollary, Article 9 also stipulates that Japan's land, sea, and air forces will not be maintained. And so there will no longer be a military for to wage war for Japan, or to hold that over other countries as a threat. um, so we talked a bit about how bad things were. Things actually stayed quite bad for a short time, but not I mean for a few years, right? And talking about huge inflation, the continued explosion of the black market, continued rations for all kinds of food and for things like coal, wood, a lot of raw materials that are used to build things like houses. These are all rationed. So it was a very difficult time. 10 was rationed. Um, and there was not a lot of opportunity to find jobs or to return to jobs, and wages were also very low. So it was just a really bad time. The occupation did not bring right away a better Japan by any means. One of the interesting stories of the occupation that I haven't usually talked about, but I want to talk about, is the role of the new young prince Akihito, who just stepped down. He will become the Heisei emperor when he's when he is he is seized to the throne in 1989. But during the occupation, there is in fact a woman who his father, Hirohito, brings to become his tutor. And so this woman, her name is Elizabeth Gray Vining. She is sort of a tutor and is teaching the young Akihiko about the world. And she sort of opens his eyes in a lot of ways to what's to the world, right? And so this is an attempt to prepare him for a future as an international, as a leader of a country that is a part of a global, hopefully peaceful international order. And so this actually happens throughout the occupation as well. And it helps, and he writes about this quite a bit in his own words. She wrote about it as well. This relationship sort of paralleled the U.S.-Japan relationship happening between the occupation, perhaps, and Japan's government, that of tutoring and guidance, but also exposure, and I think also a lot of friendship as well. One of the other elements that I find just devastating, but also interesting about the occupation, is the role that women were made to play in it. The Prime Minister Higashikuno Nagahiko in 1945, in August, puts out a statement in which he essentially is trying to make to find a way to sort of allay the fear of the Japanese that the Americans are going to be barbarians who are going to come and just rape and pillage Japan. And this is partially based, I think, upon Japan's military's own atrocities on the continent, which are, when people come back home, are more and more known. So he calls for the sacrifice of thousands of Okichis, I'll tell you later in a second, of the Showa era, to hold back the occupation troops while their sexual desires. And this is really a call for women of Japan to sacrifice their bodies as a sexual sort of buffer, for the arriving men. So who is Okichi? Okichi is this sort of an apocryphal story of a geisha who was assigned to Townsend Harris, who was the person you may know who was the first U.S. Consul to Japan as a nurse. She probably was not his consort, but the story sort of developed that she may have been a consort. She was actually treated very badly because of her ties to Townsend Harris. But anyway, she was seen, she was given to Townsend Harris by the shogunate to appease him, right? So that he would draw up favorable terms in the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, and he would sort of, report things that were positive back to the United States. So that part is definitely true. And her life was hard. She committed suicide in 1892 because of how hard her life was. Even though it's clear that she was not by any means married to or had a true relationship with Townsend Harris. So this story is what he's talking about when he talks about modern day Showa era Okishis needed to come help hold back the mad frenzy. This is she's also the subject of a John Wayne film called Barbarian Geisha, which we can see a still from here. So how does this actually play out in practice? The government creates a recreation and amusement association, the RAA, which has the goal to promote mutual understanding between the occupation forces and the Japanese, and to work towards a peaceful world. And it calls on the women of Japan. It calls new Japanese women, clearly evoking terms from the Taisho era, to get out there and cooperate in this endeavor, to comfort, right? This is an important word, comfort the occupation forces. So the RAA is born. Initially, about 1,000 women enroll, and then this number quickly grows to 70,000 women enrolling in this program, and the U.S. soldiers line up right away to be part of this program. So there were 31 of these stations in Tokyo alone, and there were more all over Japan. Now, what initially was proposed was that these would be sort of a mixer, social mixer kind of an opportunity where the soldiers and the women could interact. But what really happens is, that these men who are indeed craving interaction and warmth and conviviality, they take advantage of this situation, and they engage in sexual activities from groping to rape with these women, many of whom did not plan for that when they got there. So this story, I can't go into more for the sake of time, but the sex services provided to the occupation forces was actually quite enormous. We are sure that $38.5 million of the money that troops spent, U.S. troops spent in Japan during the occupation, which lasts until 52, were spent on sex services. We know that there were at least 2,200 registered prostitutes who dressed in Western dress, panpan, for occupied forces, because there was registration and data on that. And we can estimate that there were about 10,000 sex workers in all. And probably 1 out of 3 had some form of venereal disease, which explains why about 1/4 of servicemen also were giving and getting back venereal diseases as well. One of the sadder legacies of these encounters is, of course, the women involved in this sex trade industry. Many of them not by choice initially, although there are many stories of women who chose this as a way to make ends meet in a very hostile social, cultural, and economic environment. But another sad legacy of this is the many or children who are born to GIs with Japanese women from whom they refuse to take responsibility. And this is one of the legacies that we are still today, researching about, and also finding, information on the news. It's still a bit of a big deal in Japan today. So here we see the panpan, men who are taking drugs, smoking cigarettes, wearing Western clothes. And there were different kinds of prostitutes who catering to GIs. Partially, this mostly takes off after the end of the short-lived, less than a year, Recreation and Amusement Association. So women are concentrated around military bases, and they can be those who are yopan, or they cater to Western men, wapan cater to Japanese men. And then those who are catering to Western men can specialize in Black servicemen or white servicemen with, as you can imagine, a lot of differences in social status and racial ideas around that. So, so I kind of went through those last things quickly, and I'm glad that we got to talk about all these different things. But what I want to sort of leave us with is a picture of an occupied Japan that is just, there's a lot of movement, a lot of people. Let me put my screen up again here. We see just a tremendous amount of interaction between GIs and Japanese people, be it women, be it children, be it the Japanese government. There's just a lot of interaction. And so it's a very tight and interactive, but by no means equal kind of occupation. And looking at this from the outside, there is a sort of this effort to think benevolently about Japan that the occupation is trying to instill and enforce. Of course, you know, the reality is that there was a lot of rape, there was a lot of abandonment of women and also their children. You know, there were sometimes people were killed by rowdy GIs who were driving too fast, or you know, there are these kinds of stories even from the very beginning of the occupation. But the attitude of the GIs was not one of exploitation, and you know, on purpose. And in fact, they were actually watching videos that I was surprised to see. We're trying to help them be more culturally sensitive. So, you know, I mean, for 1946, I think we can give look at this sort of situation as one that the American soldiers approached with somewhat of an open mind, and that we also see that the interactions, for all that they were terrible in many ways, they left at worst a mixed impression of the Japanese, and oftentimes one that was, you know, somewhat positive. And so this lays the foundation for the U.S. and Japan working together, and this is part of why the U.S. and Japan today are such strong allies. It goes back to this very difficult period here with, you know, a mixture of you know, exploitation and benevolence and paternalism and again exploitation. But these worked together to make this relationship very solid. As we'll talk about next class, it's only because the Japanese and the Americans were able to work together that the U.S. was able to then push the Japanese to change their pathway. We'll talk next class about the reverse course, and I've asked you to write your next response paragraph about that topic. But that was possible only because the Japanese and the Americans have by that point become very closely linked together and able to collaborate. So for tomorrow, please be sure and watch the video and take the quiz. It's only 5 questions. It's very easy. If you get an answer wrong, you still get some credit. So you should definitely take the quiz. But most importantly, watch the video, and then tomorrow you guys can discuss that in your sections. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, you can let me know, and I'll look around for hands. Okay, so thanks a lot, guys. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
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 I just had a question. So we're watching 40 minutes of the video, right? So like we're starting at 40 and then like finishing it.
Yes, that's correct, Angela.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So Devin, how are